It's 5 p.m. across India. I am Tanvi Taneja, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global. We'll bring you the day's big stories from across India and the world. With me today from London is my colleague, Ollie Barrett. Hello, Ollie.
Hello, Tanvi. It's 11:30 here in the UK, 12:30 p.m. across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, a former Prime Minister back in government in the UK, the latest from the Middle East, and India's External Affairs Minister Mark Stiwari here in London. First, the headlines.
Former UK Prime Minister David Cameron returns to government as Foreign Minister in a surprise move. James cleverly replaces sacked Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. India's Commerce Minister to attend two key trade-related meetings of the IPEF and the APEC in San Francisco, also to interact with eminent business persons, prominent academicians. Israeli military operations continue in northern Gaza. Cross-border hostilities spike on the border with Lebanon. And Sri Lankan President presents the annual budget, says the island nation's economy successfully regained momentum last year. Hello and welcome once again to DD India Global. First news from the America. India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal will attend the APEC Economic Leaders Summit in San Francisco. India has been invited to the 30th APEC Economic Leaders meeting as a guest economy. Goyal will also attend the ministerial meeting of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, that's IPEF, in San Francisco today. During his 4-day visit to the US, Goyal will interact with industry leaders, prominent academicians and US officials to further strengthen the economic and commercial ties between the two countries. Piyush Goyal will also hold bilateral meetings with US Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, US Trade Representative Catherine Tai, and ministers of other IPEF partner countries on the sidelines of the IPEF ministerial meeting. These meetings will focus on addressing trade barriers, promoting investment and greater cooperation in areas such as technology and innovation. So the stage is set in San Francisco for the biggest international event the city has hosted since 1945. Leaders from across the Asia-Pacific are flying in for the APEC summit that President Joe Biden will host this week. DD India's Simon Marks is at the summit in San Francisco.
India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal will represent Prime Minister Narendra Modi at this year's APEC summit here in San Francisco, the first APEC summit to be held on American soil since 2011. The agenda is absolutely vast, and over the course of the last few hours here in San Francisco, fresh pressure has been applied on both President Biden, the host of the summit, and Chinese President Xi Jinping ahead of their meeting face-to-face on the sidelines of this event on Wednesday. It took fully a year for Washington and Beijing to negotiate even the possibility of a face-to-face meeting between the two men. So tense has the bilateral relationship between Washington and Beijing been, especially in the months since the United States shot down that Chinese surveillance balloon flying in American airspace. On Wednesday, it comes at a time, of course, when President Biden will be traveling to this APEC summit to reinforce the notion that the United States sees itself as a Pacific power and is absolutely determined to deepen its partnership with its partners across the Indo-Pacific in a bid to try and counter China's expansionist tendencies. Other issues where there may be difficulties making headway include the crisis underway in the Gaza Strip. There is disagreement among many of the countries attending this APEC summit over precisely who is to blame for the intensifying crisis in the Middle East. Many of APEC's 21 member states want the United States to liberalize its approach to trade, to allow market access access, even perhaps to agree to begin the negotiation of free trade agreements. The Biden administration does not appear to be coming to this summit with that kind of an approach in mind. 78 years ago has San Francisco seen an international gathering like this. The city has cleaned up in the immediate vicinity around the Moscone Center where this summit is being held. Big stakes here, a big event, and of course enormous outcomes banking on it that will come out of this conference for nations throughout the Indo-Pacific. Simon Marks for DD India at the APEC summit in San Francisco.
On to the UK politics now. Former UK Prime Minister David Cameron is the next Foreign Secretary and will take a seat in the House of Lords to enable him to take up this post. My colleague Ollie Barrett is in London. He gives us more on this and other headlines across the world. Ollie, a rather surprise move by Sunak here in appointing Cameron as the next Foreign Secretary?
Very much so, Tanvi. A large surprise in British politics, a bombshell, no less, and we'll get to David Cameron in a moment. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has also, though, sacked the Home Secretary Suella Braverman after a series. Braverman's removal comes just days after she defied Rishi Sunak by publishing an article attacking the Metropolitan Police's handling of pro-Palestinian marches. Downing Street said it had not signed off on that article, and she had previously been criticised for language used on issues around migration and homelessness. It is part of a wider reshuffle of Rishi Sunak's cabinet, which sees James Cleverly become the new Home Secretary.
Well, it's been a huge privilege to serve as Foreign Secretary, and in that time I worked very closely with my colleagues in the Home Office, cracking down on illegal migration, reducing the number of small boat arrivals, and now as the Home Secretary I'm absolutely committed to stopping the boats as we promised, but also making sure that everybody in the UK feels safe and secure.
DD India's Stuart Smith joins me now live from London to talk more about all of this. And Stuart, the reshuffle very much still underway. What's the latest you can bring us?
Well, of the three main jobs in British politics, the Home Secretary, the Chancellor and also the Foreign Secretary, we have results about who is moving and who isn't. If we start with where there's been no change at the Treasury, Jeremy Hunt, as expected, is remaining in place to deliver his autumn statement next week, which is expected to lay out from the government's perspective what could be done to improve the economy ahead of the general election, with a date still not decided, but expected to happen or must happen before January 2025. But then what the jury was out on was whether Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who's responsible for policing and internal affairs, would go or not. And indeed, she's gone. She posed a big problem for the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, because she would often say things that much of his party supported, most usually on the right of his party, but said things that he himself did not agree with and he felt was not government policy. So the most recent one being indeed, as we heard there, about the protests and whether the police should have allowed that pro-Palestinian protest to go ahead in London. But she's made comments before that were counter to government messaging, such as on immigration, grooming gangs, homosexuality and homelessness. And Rishi Sunak was being accused of weakness by allowing her to stay. He's now obviously let her go, but she could pose more of a threat from the backbenches and is potentially, according to some political analysts, looking to replace Rishi Sunak in the future. So James Cleverly replaces her in the Home Office, and replacing him is indeed the former UK Prime Minister David Cameron, who will be now known as Lord Cameron.
And what is the thinking, Stuart, behind bringing the former Prime Minister David Cameron back into government?
Well, Rishi Sunak hasn't yet explained his reasoning, but David Cameron has commented. He says that though he disagreed with the Prime Minister on some individual decisions, he believes that Rishi Sunak is a strong and capable Prime Minister who's capable of showing exemplary leadership at a difficult time. And he's also hinted at what the main reason for this may be, the upcoming election. He says, David Cameron, I want to be part of the strongest possible team that can be presented to the country when the general election is held. So with David Cameron at the helm, someone who's experienced. Of course, 6 years as Prime Minister, but also has contacts with major players on the world stage, Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping. He can deal with that, while Rishi Sunak focuses on the election. And it also indicates a potential shift in policy from the government as to how they're approaching this upcoming general election, with previously Rishi Sunak trying to lay out himself as a change candidate, but after 13 years it started to become clear that wasn't working, and he's going full out with the idea that he is going with David Cameron, who is of course not a figure of change for the party, but will hopefully, from Rishi Sunak's point of view, retain voters in key blue wall seats, in seats that are traditionally Conservative, which even now the Labour Party is starting to threaten.
Thank you, Stuart. India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, says the nation is the fastest growing economy with leadership, vision, and, he says, good governance. He said this during a meeting with the Indian community here in London. The minister also praised contributions from the community in highlighting India's profile globally. The minister is on a 5-day visit to the UK and celebrated Diwali by offering prayers at Neasden Temple here in London.
So, I want to assure you things are going very well at home. You can see that in the manner in which we had a very, very successful G20 presidency in very difficult circumstances. The world did not believe that we could get everybody together. And it took a Prime Minister like Narendra Modi to do that. Similarly, we have come through a very difficult period like the entire world has on COVID. But India is today the fastest growing large economy, and there is a very good reason. It is growing because today there is leadership, there is vision, there is good governance.
Next to the Israel-Hamas conflict, which is into day 38. A video released by the Israeli army shows ammunition and combat equipment found in multiple raids. Israel accuses Hamas of operating an underground headquarters in tunnels beneath hospitals in Gaza. The Israeli army claims the terrorist group deliberately uses patients as human shields. On October the 7th, Hamas launched a wave of attacks on Israel that killed 1,200 people. An anti-tank guided missile was fired from Lebanon at an area near the northern part of Israel. Earlier, Hezbollah claimed responsibility for the attack that injured 7 Israeli soldiers. In response, the Israeli Air Force targeted Hezbollah's terror targets and military infrastructure in Lebanon. In Sudan, more people are being forced to flee to neighbouring Chad as fighting rages in Darfur. The United Nations says at least 800 people were killed in recent attacks by the Rapid Support Forces militia in a bid to control West Darfur state. DD India's Naba Mohideen reports from Port Sudan.
In a new threat to the unity of Sudan and a real warning of a looming civil war in Darfur region, the RSF militia is now accused of ethnically driven killings in western Darfur, Al Jinain city, in many towns, Adramata town, specifically when they tried to control that city on November 4th and November 5th. According to the United Nations, there is at least 800 people were killed, mainly from boys and men from non-Arab tribes, and there is 300 men and boys are missing right now. The RSF denied the accusations, but many resources on the ground from many tribes confirmed that a massacre took place in Al Jinaina, and there is expected violence and from the two sides. The situation looks like 2003 civil war in Darfur when Arab tribes and backed by RSF and the government at that time attacked non-Arab tribes. So the situation is really risky and the humanitarian situation is very dire. People are trying to flee from the violence and war zone area to neighboring countries like Chad. There is a lot of warning by the United Nations and many international organizations that urgent intervention needed to prevent civil war and genocides and war crimes, because it's apparently that RSF right now are trying to control vast areas of Darfur. Maybe it will be one of the strategic points or cards in the ongoing Jeddah talks to negotiate the power in Khartoum and in Darfur region. Naba Muhiddin, reporting for DD India from Sudan.
South Korea's Defense Minister Shin Won-sik and his US counterpart Lloyd Austin have revised a bilateral security agreement at security talks in Seoul. The tailored deterrence strategy aims at countering North Korea's nuclear weapons and other arms. The revision was considered necessary as the existing strategy was not addressing rapid advancements in North Korea's missile programs.
Secretary Austin and I affirmed that we can never accept any nuclear attack by North Korea, and if North Korea uses nuclear weapons, the country will face immediate, overwhelming and decisive response from South Korea and the United States, which will lead to the end of the Kim Jong-un regime.
And our deterrence commitment to the ROK remains ironclad. That includes the full range of our nuclear, conventional, and missile defense capabilities.
DD India correspondent Patrick Fock has more from Singapore.
Well, the US and South Korea are in the middle of talks in Seoul on the North Korean threat, and one of the things that the two sides have done is to upgrade the so-called tailored deterrence strategy, which is aimed at countering North Korea's nuclear weapons and other arms. It has been in place for 10 years now, but the two countries felt that it didn't adequately respond to the rapid developments that Pyongyang has been making with its nuclear and ballistic missiles program. So the idea now is to expand on that. What that means isn't clear, but the current strategy entails the deployment of strategic assets, including US nuclear forces. And US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin noted that recently it had deployed ballistic missile submarines as well as a B-52 to South Korea, and he also suggested that the tempo of those deployments could continue despite other major global crises taking place right now. It also comes after the Atlantic Council think tank recently issued a study warning that the advancements that both North Korea and China were making in their weapons capabilities meant that there was a dramatic increase in the risk that the US and South Korea's deterrent strategies could fail in the next decade.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo is set to hold a bilateral meeting with US President Joe Biden later. The talks will aim to deepen trade ties between the two nations, but issues including China and the situation in Gaza are also expected to feature prominently. DD India's William Denzelo reports from New York.
According to a statement from the White House, Joe Biden and Joko Widodo's discussions will focus on deepening the partnership between the world's second and third largest democracies. The White House adds a little bit more information on what the two leaders will be discussing, including cooperation on clean energy transitions, advancing economic prosperity, and ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific. We can also expect the issue of China to dominate much of the conversations, likely, according to analysts here from Indonesia's leader, calling for the US and China to cool tensions. This comes just a few days before President Joe Biden is expected to meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in San Francisco in just a few days' time. Economics will likely feature very prominently in this bilateral meeting between the leaders of the US and Indonesia. Some analysts saying we might expect a limited free trade agreement. Much of the focus will be on market access to critical minerals, especially nickel, produced by Indonesia, that could play a pivotal role when it comes to easing US supply chain issues as it looks to ramp up the production of electric vehicles in the future. The issue of Gaza will likely also be in focus and will likely be discussed. Joko Widodo has described the humanitarian situation in Gaza as unacceptable. Joe Biden, the US president, has been pushing for more humanitarian pauses to see a more humanitarian access into the Palestinian enclave. But, of course, the United States has historically been a staunch ally of Israel. William Denslow in New York reporting for DD India.
A very busy week ahead for international diplomacy. Tanvi, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Ollie. Ollie Barrett joining us from our London bureau. You're watching DD India Global, still to come on the show. India's New Delhi is all set to host the biggest ever international trade fair at the newly redeveloped Pragati Maidan complex. And the final season of Netflix series The Crown launched as a love letter to Queen Elizabeth II.
Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, stories of real change, tales of sustainable solution.
This series is going to tell stories of such change makers.
Watch Change Makers on DD India. Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, stories of real change, tales of sustainable solution.
This series is going to tell stories of such change makers.
Watch Change Makers on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I am Tanvi Taneja. Sri Lankan President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is also the island nation's finance minister, presented the annual budget for 2024 in Parliament on Monday. Wickremesinghe called for upliftment of Sri Lanka and cast aside political differences for this purpose. The president said Sri Lanka's public debt as a percentage of the GDP is expected to be reduced from 128% in 2022 to 95% in 2032 under the debt restructuring supported by the International Monetary Fund. President Wickremesinghe underlined the need to use taxpayers' money to protect the stability of banks, preventing their possible collapse. Sri Lanka is going for presidential elections next year. Recounting the economic crisis experienced by Sri Lanka last year, Wickremesinghe mentioned the assistance of India.
We strive to rescue the country from hellish situations it was facing. Government employees showed dedication and hard work to salvage the nation. Our friends helped us out.
And from Colombo to New Delhi, India's capital city is all set to host the biggest ever international trade fair at the newly redeveloped Pragati Maidan complex. Thousands of participants from several countries are likely to visit Delhi for this mega event. DD India's Dibendu Mondal reports.
After the successful completion of the G20 summit in September this year, Delhi is once again gearing up to host another mega event at the newly redeveloped Pragati Maidan complex. This time, Delhi is all set to host the biggest ever 42nd edition of the India International Trade Fair. The theme, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, United by Trade. Countries from across the world will gather at the national capital to participate at this mega international event. Women entrepreneurs from the SAARC countries will be a key focus of this year's trade fair. SAARC countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Maldives, Nepal and Bhutan will also set up pavilions to showcase their best products and businesses to the world. Other countries like Turkey, Qatar, Bahrain will also be major participants at the International Trade Fair. The mega event is scheduled to be held between the 14th and the 27th of November this year. More than 1 million people are expected to visit this international trade fair this year. Spread over 1 lakh square meters, the 14 halls of the Swanky Pragati Maidan complex will showcase businesses and innovations from across the world. At home, states like Bihar, Jharkhand and Kerala will be the partner states for this edition of the International Trade Fair, while states like Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir and Maharashtra will be the focus states. Not only this, visitors and participants will also have an experience of cuisines from across 30 states of India at the mega open food zone at the trade fair. This mega 13-day event in the national capital has already started creating a buzz amongst the business communities from across the world. And the event will further enhance India's image at the world stage. Dibyendu Mondal's report for DD India.
And now let's take a look at what else is happening around the world. One of Australia's largest ports operator is back online after a cyber attack crippled its facilities on Monday. Operations had resumed at all its facilities after a cybersecurity incident forced it to suspend operations for 3 days. The breach had crippled operations of about 40% of the goods that flow in and out of Australia. Nepal has decided to ban the Chinese short-form video app TikTok, citing its negative effects on social harmony. According to the local media report, the government has said that a large section of society criticized TikTok for encouraging hate speech. It is not yet known when the ban will be implemented. A team from the Cornell University in New York have floated nearly 400 solar panels across 3 ponds at the Cornell Experimental Pond facility. The floating solar panels on lakes and ponds are an inexpensive solution to maximize space for renewable energy generation while minimizing land impact. Italy's Mount Etna shows off spectacular red-hot explosions spewing lava and ash high over the Mediterranean island of Sicily. A massive plume of ash steam rose into the sky over Sicily from a southeast crater of Europe's tallest and most active volcano. And the final season of The Crown on Netflix premiered in the Los Angeles on November 12th, following the events leading up to Princess Diana's death in 1997. Netflix's series starring Elizabeth Debicki as Diana has returned with star-studded premieres. The series has seen numerous actors portraying the royal family. Claire Foy and Matt Smith is portrayed by various actors. Showrunner Peter Morgan expressed his enjoyment in writing about the 1950s. That's it in this edition of DD India Global. Join us for another edition of the show at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Do let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. Connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks air on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.